Welcome to At Home and Abroad with Harrison Walker. Join us each week as we follow our curiosity, diving deep into the familiar and the foreign. Reach beyond your front door as we uncover new perspectives, explore intriguing ideas, and have real conversations with the best guests. Ready for something different? Let's get started. Climate change is not often something that's super top of mind when people are planning their holidays, though perhaps it should be. Climate change impacts not only our future, but also our everyday lives. And the rate at which our climate warms is partially influenced by how, when, and where people choose to escape from the stressors of their daily lives. So why would you say we as global tourists need to better consider climate change when planning our holidays, perhaps now more than ever before?
Yeah, certainly over the last couple of years, climate change certainly hasn't been at the top of mind for most travelers. We've just gone through a crazy era through COVID with all kinds of restrictions, and in that recovery period, everybody's just worried: am I and my bag going to get to the place where I'm supposed to be? Has been at the top of mind for the last little while. But before COVID paid us a visit, we saw movements like flight shaming, more so in Europe than in, say, the North American market. But that remind us, that there is certainly awareness and things are changing in that respect, and that people are paying more attention to that. I think most people now, most Canadians want to take action on climate change in their everyday lives, and they've figured out, well, how do I do that at home, maybe at work, and holidays. Their travel patterns is something that they're adding to that, and most struggle with how do I go about doing that. And part of the problem there is the travel industry doesn't have carbon labeling. So when you go to buy a home, you go to buy a car, you go to buy an appliance, it tells you the energy efficiency. It tells you something about the carbon footprint of that choice. We don't have that in the travel industry. So that makes it difficult for people to actually understand the difference between holiday A and B. And there was a really good survey in the UK of asked homeowners or the citizens in the UK, what are the top things you can do about climate change that you have personal control over? And they listed those things off. And then they compared those against, well, what are the actions that would have the greatest impact on your footprint? And the biggest area of misunderstanding was related to travel. So people were talking about getting out of their cars and biking to work and things like that. But one transatlantic flight for a Canadian, somebody going Toronto, Heathrow, or something like that, that can be as much carbon as they do, that they use in their car in a given year, depending on how much they drive, what they drive. And so, you can't not heat your home. Most people can't not drive and switch to public transit. Some can, but you might be able to take one less flight a year and substitute that for a different kind of holiday or things like that. Travel can do amazing things, but some types of travel are certainly more compatible with a low carbon economy than other kinds right now. And people are just trying to get their heads around what those choices are.
Yeah. And I think it's important to educate ourselves on how our travel and the modes of travel that we're taking on can have quite a serious impact on climate change and our footprint.
Yep.
This, for me, I'm a skier. I'm not sure. Are you a skier?
Yes, my wife's family is Austrian, so the skis come with the passport, I think. Yeah. But I am not of that quality. No, I get dragged along.
Yeah, I also get dragged along. I learned as an adult with my kids, so I'm such a chicken on the slopes, but I still love it. And it was really shocking to me, a couple of winters, I would say, there have been some headlines around the world of a real lack of snow base at very popular ski resort destinations. And I suspect it's not only a concern for ourselves as people who love to ski, but also for those communities that support or are almost fully supported by these local tourist industries. So I know you've done a lot of research in this area and published a lot of studies in this area. Can you explain a little bit to our listeners the impact that climate change is having on winter tourism?
Yeah. So that's a question I've been asked a lot in the media over the last probably 5, maybe even going back further, number of years. And some of them always looked at me a bit perplexed when I used to say to them, it hasn't had an impact on the ski industry. And what I mean by that is from about 1980 through to about 2010, Average ski seasons were actually getting longer and longer in every North American regional market. So from the East Coast to the West Coast. And the reason for that is the ski industry invested hundreds of millions of dollars in snowmaking. And so that was enabled them to lengthen the ski season and smooth out the bumps from year to year, particularly the early season around Christmas and things like that. So we were actually seeing average seasons getting longer, even though the climate was getting warmer. That switched about 2010. So the last decade or so, we've seen that tip the other way. So average seasons are actually getting a little bit shorter. So we've probably passed the era of what you might call peak ski season. And same with snowmobiling in more rural areas, that's a big part of their tourism. We're sort of past that sort of peak of length of season, the ability to connect trails over over ice surfaces and things like that. So that's where we stand today. And as you said, we're seeing more in the Southern Ontario area of these sort of green Christmases, where even a place like Blue Mountain with tremendous snowmaking capacity can't get open, and they've got to keep the ropes course and other things open for the kids to give them something to do around Christmas. And so that's what we're facing now. Of course, the billion or $1 trillion question is, what are we looking at in the future? And there we really have two futures. If the world's able to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement, the targets for lower emissions, and that is an if, but assuming that's what we're all working towards, then sort of by mid-century, so the next couple of decades, the ski industry you'd recognize it. There'd be a few players that fall out of the marketplace, but Southern Ontario would exist as a market, Quebec and other places out west. Again, some places like California might struggle a little bit, as we've seen with snow droughts and some of the atmospheric rivers that they've had if they come as rain. So that's a low emission future. Looks not unlike what we've had the last sort of decade, a little bit worse. If we continue along the high emission trajectory, which is where we are now, then the entire geography of the ski industry begins to change. And so what you see in mid-century in Eastern Canada, you see parts of the Southern Ontario market fall out. You'll see parts of New York struggle as well. Quebec is colder, further away from the Great Lakes and maritime and climate influence. High elevation Vermont and New Hampshire will be okay. So pieces of the market will be there. There'll be winners and losers, and understanding who those different destinations will be, as you said, for the communities is a big question, because they're all going to have to adapt, but for different reasons. If you're one of the winners, like when we've done surveys of skiers, like, well, if you couldn't ski here today, where would you go? And, a whole bunch of them mentioned Blue Mountain or Mount St. Louis Moonstone. Well, people are going to go there. You've got to be able to handle that. So you can't just have more snowmaking. You have to have lift capacity, parking, services, and all of those things that allow you to benefit from that transfer of demand and do better as a business. And so that's what each of the communities has to look at. How are they going to adapt over the next couple of decades, depending on whether they're more climate resilient than maybe some of their market competitors.
Mm-hmm. And tourists themselves will have to adapt because there will be more expense. But is there also a climate impact in terms of people having to travel further afield to ski?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So that's what we've always typically found is as your local ski areas, maybe if some of them fall out of the marketplace, yeah, people have to travel longer. And there is also a secondary concern that not just for recreational skiers like ourselves, but we've heard that from Olympians as well, that if your kids don't learn to ski here at Chicopee, which is our local hill, or Glen Eden near Toronto, would they have learned to ski? Well, if you have to drive your kid to Blue Mountain for 2 hours or 3 hours driving, how many wouldn't have learned to ski? So that's your pipeline to the next generation of skiers, but it's also your pipeline to the next generation of elite athletes. So if they don't learn to ski, do they take up hockey, gymnastics, whatever the thing is, and you never get them into the winter sports pool and then work our way up to the Olympics? So that's a sort of twofold risk. That yes, there's additional travel costs, potentially additional emissions. If more people fly to Whistler or Colorado to ski, the emission footprint of that tourism goes through the roof. And so the more we can keep people locally, and I've heard some people, complain about the emissions relating to snowmaking, and I say they're not understanding the system, because in Quebec, And here in Ontario, our electricity grid is pretty much decarbonized. Like it's
Right.
hydro and nuclear, or it's hydro in Quebec. So that snowmaking, if you double the amount of snowmaking, comes with a very little carbon footprint. So if you can keep people in the region,
Right.
and if they take an electric car, you can pretty much have a net zero holiday now. The minute they
Right.
get on an aircraft to fly to Colorado, to Aspen, or to Whistler or Sunshine, the carbon footprint of that holiday is like 10, 20-fold what it would have been if you stayed home.
Thank you for joining us at Home and Abroad with your host, Harrison Walker. You have been listening to an excerpt of a larger episode from Season 1. For the full episode, you can visit our website or browse our back catalog. If you enjoyed this episode, you would be a real gem if you would rate and review our show. It helps us to grow and expand our reach. You can also subscribe to follow us each week as we continue the conversation. Find us on Instagram at Harrison Walker, or visit us at www.homeandabroadpodcast.com. We do have great merch, just saying. And of course, we would love to hear from you. And for you truly dedicated fans who have listened all the way to the end of this episode, we offer exclusive interviews, outtakes, challenges, and more on our paid channel, not even the cost of a latte once a month, depending, of course, on where you buy your coffee.